Hi, everyone. I am here with Dr. Peter Afflerbach, and this is our second conversation in two areas that are really important and relevant right now. If you've missed our first conversation around contextualizing the sciences of reading, that will be on the LitBlock. It's already on the LitBlock for you. Now we're moving on into assessment. So we're thinking about assessments for learning and what to do with them. And I really just want to emphasize the word "for" in the title, assessments for learning and what to do with them. If this is your first time hearing from Dr. Afflerbach, I know that when we're done, it will not be the last because he's so chock full of brilliance and research, and the way he's shaped our educational landscape makes me want to keep having conversations and keep reading what he's done. So if it is your first time here with Dr. Afflerbach, he is a former K-6 reading teacher and then turned educational researcher. So coming with his feet squarely in the classroom. And he has done so much research around reading comprehension strategies, the development of metacognitive skills and strategies, and then the others like self-efficacy, motivation, engagement, and is a member of the Reading Hall of Fame, which is just so fancy. Does it come with a plaque or something?
It does.
Oh, good. And then also an AERA research fellow. So not only has he done some incredible research that has influenced our educational landscape, others note it and appreciate it and have been shaped by it. So now let's dig into assessments for learning and what to do with them. So here we are, and let's just say the last few months, like 21, 22 months, something like that, we have had many stops and starts and resets and new settings when it comes to instruction. So maybe we can just call that interrupted instruction over these many months. So with that interrupted instruction, we know assessment is really important, helps us gauge where students are and where they can go. But there are mountains of assessments that could be taken right now. And we don't want to assess kids to, all day, every day for forever. It's time to teach. So at this point, and reflecting on all of this, what do you recommend as the most important assessments for teaching and learning?
Well, that's a tough question. Let me start by saying like my view on reading assessment is that we want to get a really rich and broad sample of student behavior, because assessment is really about making inferences from these samples of behavior, and trying to get our heads around what each child can do in our classroom. And I think of a good assessment program in relation to reading. And the way that I think about reading is that we construct meaning. We bring our prior knowledge and our language ability to the classroom, to a book. We read or we observe and listen, and we construct meaning. And so when I felt like my work in classroom assessment was going well, I had the daily opportunity to continue to construct meaning or an understanding of each student in my classroom. And I think one of the greatest disruptions over the last 2 or 1.5 years or 1 year, depending on where you are, is that the opportunity to observe my students, to listen to my students, I don't want to say was taken away, but it went away. And I feel like that's just the greatest blow to the ability to be a good classroom assessment person. And related, I work with student teachers every semester at the University of Maryland. And when I was holding my remote classes, I was reminded of the remoteness of remote learning, because my student teachers were sitting, at their breakfast table or on a sofa or in bed with their laptops, and they were watching their mentor teacher, who was at her home or his home or their home, remotely working with 25 students who are on their laptops, and the inability to be in the moment, you know, to catch the things that kids say to one another, to be able to determine what I would say the with itness or unwith itness of each student just went away. And so that, to me, that is such a, I don't know what the outcome of this inability of teachers to be able to pay attention to that stuff is, but I would say that, plus the fact that we know that students in their homes had such a diversity of experience, have and had such a diversity experience in terms of the language used at home and the availability of books, and whether or not people talked about things that were being read, and whether or not parents were available to provide support, you know, guardians providing support, extended family, reading aloud, that sort of thing. So to me, it emphasizes the need for our detailed and regular assessments of reading. And if I were to you know, come up with a magic menu of assessments, one of the things that I really like to do is look at oral reading and do oral reading analysis. If you want to get specific, you know, there are a couple of reading inventories that are commercially published out there. There's Mari Clay's Running Records, and that oral reading sample, especially in the early grades, to me is a treasure trove of information about how kids think about reading, about their ability to sound out words, to apply phonics, to read fluently, to deal with what might be unfamiliar vocabulary, and then hopefully to put it all together and comprehend the text that they're reading. I think the same thing can be said about specific, even worksheets that are focused on these intimate and important parts of reading development. And, you know, I'm thinking there around the level of phonemic awareness and phonics. But on the other hand, I also want to be paying attention to whether or not students have gained or lost or maintained their motivation and engagement for schooling in general and reading in particular. I'd like to know whether or not students have become more metacognitive in the last year and a half, or have put that on hold unintentionally, or have regressed because they're not in the classroom or teachers helping to remind them on a regular basis that it's really important to think about your reading. So I feel like we should be in a real catch-up mode, not just getting the detailed information about cognitive strategies and skills, but also about the mindsets of students. Are they being reflective? Have they gained positive attitude? Are they believing or not believing in themselves as readers? And there are, it turns out, thank goodness, loads of assessments out there that we might pick and choose from.
Well, that's good, because that was my next question. How does a teacher then assess, say, metacognition?
Well, you know, I'm a big fan of listening and observing.
So simple and yet
yeah.
so useful, right?
Yeah. Well, we can get more simple and listen and observe. We could say see and hear, you know, so what's going on in the classroom? And I've always felt that that's like one of the best, it's certainly the most immediate barometer of how a child or kid is doing. And if you, you know, see engaged discussions about what's being read amongst some kids, but amongst other kids, you see like detachment and the look of I'd rather be doing almost anything else, except maybe math or science, you know, that sort of thing, then the observation matters. And if you hear enthusiasm in a child's voice, as opposed to sort of that flat affect, or I'm not really sure what we're talking about, you know, those are always, to me, assessment events that will prompt my attention to a particular child, and then require or demand of me follow-up in whatever understanding I'm still constructing about the student. This goes back to, I think, what I said at the beginning of our little chat, which is I always think about assessment as a continual construction of meaning of each student. You know, like much as we read a book, we read students, and we hope the things change from day to day, as opposed to a book that's sort of firm in its ending. So
Right, exactly. That is just such an important thing that you said that I just want to underscore, because I do work with a lot of schools and I'm so blessed to do so. And one thing that I'm seeing right now is that teachers are feeling overwhelmed by the assessments, these formal assessments. And by you taking just so assessment is happening every day as we read students, as we read the learners in our setting, and we can look at what students say and do, and we can listen to them. And
yeah.
as simple as that, that gives us the data that helps us then make instructional choices.
Yeah, and there are actually formal psychometrically sound instruments out there.
The
One,
word psychometrically scares me.
yeah, well, it's supposed to, right? So, yeah. So there's a thing called the MARCI, which is Metacognitive Awareness of Reading Strategies Inventory, and you can find that online. Just like Google MARSI,
Mhm.
and then put metacognition in there. And this is in the public domain. You don't have to pay for it. It's quite extensive. So I don't know that any classroom teacher could ever use all of the items. But if you look at the items, you get a good sense of what kind of questions do you want to ask, or what kind of, like hypotheses or theories do you want to start building about particular kids. In the same vein, there are a couple of really good inventories or questionnaires related to students' motivation and engagement. And if you look those up on the internet, you can find them readily. There are also assessments related to student self-efficacy and related to the attributions that students make. And my advice if you were to take these full instruments off the internet, you would then have 800 questions to ask each student, or 800 points. So what I like to do is beg, borrow, or steal from these instruments, and focus on what are the three things that I find in this inventory about metacognition that I think are really important for me to ask my students, because I know that through trying out these questions, they give me really good information to work with.
Yeah.
So there are instruments out there, but again, I don't know any classroom teacher who would have the time to administer, let alone accurately interpret the results of all of these inventories. But by all means, go out there, find them, and sample from them.
Yes. So you just gave us so many options. And I think that's really important, because we know that those who come to listen to these conversations on LitBlock either need just one recommendation or are curious about them all. So you gave us many possibilities here. And that also leads me into my last question for you.
Can I say one thing
Of
before the
course,
last
of
question?
course.
So, something that's really important in any assessment is validity. And a bunch of people who are psychometricians, who I really respect, make the argument that construct validity is the most important thing. It's like, how well does the assessment that you're using map onto the thing that you value, which in this case is reading and students' reading development. And what I really would recommend is that we think about the construct of students' reading development broadly. If we think about it narrowly, then all we have to do is give assessments that tell us about strategy and skill development. And then we can say, this kid's where he should be, or she's way ahead of where we would expect, or this person is struggling. But if we think about the construct of reading development as more than strategy and skill, and we have to develop metacognition to be independent and successful. And we have to develop motivation and engagement so that students will choose to read over attractive alternatives. And we have to promote self-efficacy, because if kids don't believe in themselves as readers, they won't give effort to any reading. To me, that's the true and broad construct of reading development. So when I want my assessments to be construct valid, to have construct validity, I want them to sample this very broad array of the factors that we know through sciences of reading influence reading development.
Okay, so basically you want the assessments to be relevant to what you're looking for in kids and are looking to have to then follow up with instruction.
Yes. Yeah.
So then, because it can be quite overwhelming, right? All of the information that we do get from assessments, whether they're the ones that are created formally or happening informally in a classroom setting. How do we make it easier to navigate these and then useful in terms of instruction?
Well, I would say a real breakthrough since I started as a classroom teacher, which was in the late 70s, is the speed at which we can access assessment information about our students, and then the software that helps us combine these understandings that the different assessments give us to help create these diverse portraits of students as young readers. And um, I think having mini portfolios that you can carry around on a tablet or keep somewhere online that can be regularly updated is a really good thing. Um, Again, I would say that um, while I like the advances in technology, both the software and the hardware that can increase our assessment fluency and make it matter more, I don't want to diminish the power of observing and listening, and that's, I think as teachers, we have a couple of things to do when we observe and listen. One is, how does what we just overheard, how does what we just saw influence my understanding of this particular student in the moment? And then how does that piece of information fit in with this larger mosaic that we're building of the individual student? And I think just as a beginning reader is expected to develop reading fluency, when I think about my student teachers, one of the things that I really want them to develop is assessment fluency, and it doesn't happen overnight. We have to become really familiar and then almost automatic in our um, gathering of information and then analyzing it, and then like that magic moment where all of the assessment that we've collected or a single assessment tells us this is what we should do next instructionally. And so um, I guess part of it is a maturation that we should all go through as teachers who assess and aim for that idea of assessment fluency.
And in response to what you're saying, I can speak from experience that many of us in education won't necessarily take the leap to try something new until we're feeling perfect at it. But in order for us to become assessment fluent and build our assessment fluency, I think we need to be okay with learning it the best we can and actually assessing. And then not only looking at the assessment itself, but also how we can continue to grow by using these assessments. So I just wanted to put that out there because sometimes I see, and I'm sure you see the same thing, a reluctance to try something, even though it can be good the first time around. Perhaps it's not going to be superior in its implementation, but it still is going to give us information. And then over our careers, we become even stronger at that.
Yeah, yeah. And, I know that school districts and building principals may value a particular approach to assessment and particular indicators, but I would also encourage all of us never to let go of the assessment indicators that really matter to us. And so an example would be when I think about the first, second, third, fourth graders that I've worked with and who really struggled, I guess I could say that I think some of my teaching led to increases in their stay-9 scores and their percentile ranks and their raw test scores. But I don't really remember those. What I remember is the individual child who went from a non-reader to a struggling but sometimes successful reader, or went from a non-reader to enthusiastic reader. I mean, those are the things that to me are wonderful outcomes of teaching and good assessment, but they're also real life indicators of how good our instruction has been.
For sure. Well, thank you for taking the time to chat with me about assessment. And if any of you, like me, would want to learn more, let me try and get this in here. We've
Right.
got Meaningful Reading Assessment by Peter and by Adria Klein.
Yeah.
So it's just such an excellent resource and something that can really help us build that assessment fluency that you were referring to. Thanks again for this conversation.
Oh, my
And
pleasure. My pleasure.
I know that it's going to be really beneficial for everyone.
Great. Great.